Hi, this is Michael Uslan. You're listening to Batman on Film.
The Adventures of Batman.
Welcoming you to the new adventures of Batman.
Welcome to episode 4 of Batmanimation, a Batman on Film podcast, revisiting the animated adventures of the Caped Crusader. I'm senior contributor Javi Trujillo, and joining me is the scholar of suppositions, the host of RAMEY Reviews, Micah Ramey. So, Micah, I heard you mention on the Social Hour series within a series that we do called the Batman Chapter by Chapter, how much you loved Batman Beyond. And I wanted to know a little bit more about what that show meant to you. What's your earliest recollection of the show?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for reaching out to me and inviting me on the show. I love talking anything Batman, and I love talking with anyone BOF related. So it's an honor to be here. And to address your question, I think most Batman fans are really fans of anything, always really attached to that first show or comic book or whatever material that drew them in. And that was Batman Beyond for me. And it came out when I was very young. I think I was 2 or 3 when it came out. So obviously not old enough to comprehend a lot of what was going on. But I still, some of my earliest memories of watching a Batman animated show is Batman Beyond. It's very much in the subconscious of my mind forever.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Did you grow up with the DVDs then?
Grew up with the DVDs. I'm gonna sound old now. Grew up with the VHS.
Oh, that's right. They did have those on VHS a lot too.
Yeah.
I think I was about 21 when the show aired.
Okay.
So I definitely remember it coming on to my recollection, it was like a Sunday night, like it was a night thing. And they had like this really weird intro where they had like Mr. Announcer Voice guy come on about how like this was a new era for the Dark Knight. And they did it with all these like clips, but it was like movie clips mixed with animated clips. So you had like this kind of serious tone going on, but then you had like George Clooney suiting up for Batman and Robin. Like it was just like the shot of him grabbing the cowl and stuff. And then it would cut to like, a scene from the animated series. But, it really impressed upon me how like this was the next era of Batman. Like the legend was being pushed forward. Who's your favorite voice actor for Batman?
Kevin Conroy.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to say anything else.
No.
Kevin Conroy. I mean, that's it.
Nope.
A lot of them are great, but there's only one Kevin Conroy.
I concur.
Yeah. So the original air date I am showing from IMDb was January 10th, 1999. And their synopsis reads, 50 years into the future, a young Terry McGinnis meets the aged and reclusive Bruce Wayne, even as the boy's father discovers a foul secret of his corrupt employer that leads to his death. Determined to bring his father's murderers to justice, Terry finally impulsively resorts to using Wayne's last batsuit to investigate as the new Batman. And the show primarily stars Will Friedle as Terry McGinnis, the aforementioned Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne and Batman, in this episode at least, Terry Gar, I don't know the McGar game, as Mary McGinnis, Michael Gross from Tremors as Warren McGinnis, or Family Ties if you're an old guy like me. Sherman Howard as Derek Powers, George Takei as Mr. Fix, Ryan O'Donoghue as Matt McGinnis, Lauren Tom as Dana Tan, Yvette Lowenthal as Chelsea Cunningham, and Seth Green, Scott Evil himself, as Nelson Nash. And part 1 had the story by Alan Burnett and was written by Alan Burnett and Paul Dini, who is definitely not a stranger to Batman. Part 2 was a story by Alan Burnett and was written by Stan Berkowitz. And part 1 was directed by Kurt Gedda, and so was part 2. So basically we have like an hour block, but it's 2 episodes that they put together. And we open up on the new Batman Superman adventure style Red Skies of Gotham, except it's now in the future. And where Bunny Vreeland, who is the daughter of Veronica Vreeland from Batman the Animated Series, is being held hostage. And we get to see Bruce for the first time now in this year as Batman. What were your impressions of him in the bat suit?
It's so weird seeing him in that suit, right?
Yeah.
There's something about seeing Batman's chin. Without Batman's chin, is he even Batman, you know?
Right.
It just seems weird, but I love the look of the suit, and I love the opening. I like how you talked about the red skies, which instantly drew my attention of how almost dystopian it looked. I forgot that was in the new adventures of Batman. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, I loved the way he looked in this. You can definitely tell he's older, especially what goes on later on when he takes his cowl off, which I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, first glance, it is shocking seeing him in that suit.
I mean, he's just massive because he's still like that Bruce Wayne Batman. So, I mean, just the huge upper body, torso, V-shaped. And I thought, as he goes in to rescue her, like having like cardiac issues because he's older, because his body's gone on all this stress. I think that's a great way to make him vulnerable and get across to, the viewer that he can't do this forever. Like you mentioned, when he takes off his mask, like there's that blood on his chin, like that wasn't anything like would have been seen before. They practices and standards wouldn't even allow blood on like the original animated series. So that was like a big, like it's nothing, right? It's like a little thin color red, but to see it and knowing what that meant, like that was a big deal back then.
Yes, I think even now, because I told you how much this show means to me. I just remember watching it as a kid, but watching it now, I'm like, man, this is pretty damn mature for technically, I guess, a kid show in a way. We know it's a kid show, but it's not. Adults can enjoy it too. But pretty dark in it. And I think, just I guess talking about Batman Beyond in general and why I love it so much is I just love Batman stories that really dive into Bruce Wayne's psyche. And we get that very, very quick in the first 5 minutes of the show with Bruce just mentally being able to keep going, but physically he cannot. He's outpaced that. And when his body starts failing him and he's essentially having a heart attack, I'm assuming close to that or something, stroke or something similar. And he's more than likely about to die. This thug is beating him to death with a crowbar. And he resorts to the only thing that can save him, and that's grabbing a nearby handgun, which is so un-Batman. Like it's just so weird seeing Batman have to grab a gun. It's depressing, which I think depressing is certainly and melancholy, certainly a theme of these 2 episodes, especially with Bruce Wayne. It's very depressing what's going on with him financially, emotionally, mentally, even obviously physically as he gets older and his body deteriorates. But I love the way the show begins. I think it sets it up incredibly well for another Batman to take the mantle. And I love this take of Bruce Wayne. I don't know what it is about Kevin Conroy's voice, but I think it's so fitting for an old Bruce Wayne. Yeah. I think he does old Bruce Wayne so well.
Yeah, that was something I mentioned on the second episode of this series, like Kevin Conroy's Batman versus his Bruce Wayne. And like in the earlier shows, like Batman was Batman and Bruce was Bruce, and there was like a smoothness to Bruce's voice. And that's just out the window for this series because he doesn't care. He doesn't have to have the double identity. He just has to sound older and gruff. And like there's no change from like this point on. He's just grisly and angry sounding all the time. Even when he's at the end of the episode where he's trying to be more cordial, like you can still hear a little bit of that edge to it.
Yeah.
But I liked how you pointed out the crowbar scene, because I didn't really think about it when I was watching it, but that puts him like, I mean, it's similar to how Jason died. But instead of being the Joker, it's like, it's just some guy. And the fact that
Yeah.
that he needs a gun to survive being beat up by just a random guy. It's like that's like his failure right there. Like that to me is like why he can't be Batman. Like how can he be Batman if he needs a gun to survive?
Yeah.
And just, you know, the way he pulled off the mask and just is never again. I mean, that's iconic, you know. And I know there are certain fans, you know, who think that Batman should never quit and Bruce should be Batman until he dies, and we'll give The Dark Knight Rises a hard time because like Bruce quit because of Rachel. But in this situation, do you think Batman should quit, or do you think he should have kept going on and just changed his methods?
I think he never, in this universe, or in Batman, I guess in general, would never quit. He would die. He would happily die. I mean, it's obvious. Batman would give his life for Gotham, for his family, for anyone. But the moment when he wasn't able to control his fight or flight, and he just instinctively grabbed the gun in order to survive, and just obviously, you know, with his tragic origin story, that's the gun that killed his parents. That's why he refuses to use weapons and guns at all. Him having to resort to that was what led him to quit. I don't think him being, you know, obviously him deteriorating physically and getting older, it had something to do with it, but he quit because that was the closest he ever got to crossing that line. And he's not going to let himself cross that line, which I think it's more not quitting. It's just hanging it up, you know, because he seems like he set it up well in the show. Like, you know, Barbara's a commissioner and he trusts the police. Maybe he trusts the police. He at least says he does. So I think he set it up for success in a way, or at least he's just telling himself that. But I don't think necessarily he quit. I think he did the right thing there.
Yeah. I mean, to me, he probably felt that he was compromised at that moment for having to resort to that. But moving on to the intro, like speaking of like iconic, like having Darwin Cook design this thing that shows all the villains that we're going to get throughout the series, but like you don't know it in that first episode. They're like, okay, there's this weird radioactive skull flashing, and there's this blob of ink that turns into a woman that's kind of like a James Bond title sequence. What did you think of like the score and like the visuals for that?
I am obsessed with it. I love it. I think we talked about it on the Social Hour Zone with Ryan Lauer, and I love that intro. I think it's so iconic and just so stylized, and it is very like that the way it seemed like the way the 90s perceive the future to be, but it's also, you know, incredibly cyberpunk, and also kind of like hitting in like getting close to the post-grunge rock era. So it just combines all these elements together, but it still feels timeless to me. It does kind of feel of that era, but it seems like it's everlasting. I loved it. It's so incredibly stylized. I think Darwin Cook did an incredible job with that intro. It's so, I mean, I love the way how you brought up it showcases all of the villains you'll see. So as you're continuing to watch the episodes, you're like, oh, okay, there's Ink and there's Skull, whatever, can't remember his name, but Blight. Blight, sorry. Yeah. And it's really incredibly cool. It was definitely made after the show was done. It wasn't just like, oh, here's the intro and then whatever. So
yeah, it's been a minute since I've even watched the show, which I watched it a lot back in the day. But going through like the special features again, there was a point where Bruce Timm mentions how they all submitted like music ideas to prove that he could still be on the show. And so Christopher Carter wrote, or his demo song was called Smells Like Creamed Spinach. And which is kind of a cool thing now from a 2022 perspective of how we have a Nirvana song in the Batman, and then here we have a little Nirvana influence that went into Batman Beyond.
Yeah.
But basically this track that he made up is for the most part just a different arrangement of what we know as the Batman Beyond thing. So I love all the music in this. When Lauer and I got to speak with Sean Gordon Murphy about Beyond the White Knight, one of the things I've learned is that one, that he does his own Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond podcast, which I did not know. So I've been starting off that at the very beginning. And second, he does not like the music for the show at all, which I was crushed to hear that, because I listened to this soundtrack all the time in like the early 2000s. I was all into like techno and electronica and listened to a lot of Moby. So like the weird fusion of just those beats and the guitar, like I was all about it. Like I do concede his point. At some points the guitar sounds a little Lethal Weapon-y. But I love the music, and I love that theme song. That's one of those where it's like skip intro. I was like, no, why would
yes
you?
yes I was about to say that. I was just going to say, every time it said skip intro on HBO Max, I'm like, no, are you kidding me? Why is this even an option? Of course I'm going to listen to this.
It's like Incredible. It's 60 seconds. Why would you do that? But once we get past the intro, we're now 20 years beyond the opening, and Gotham seems far more vast, maybe cleaner. It's kind of hard to tell because it's so elevated. But we closely zoom in on an elevator, but it's like a subway, but it's an elevator, and it's going up this incredibly tall building. And so going a little bit to the music on that, like it felt a little bit like the music in The Fifth Element to me, including with like this kind of orangey gold color palette we had. But Terry, we get introduced to him as he fights a Joker. So we learned like there's more throughout this episode. We learned there's a gang of Jokers. How did you feel about there being multiple iterations of this iconic villain?
I liked it. It shows that his legacy continues, even though he's passed. And obviously with Batman Beyond and the film Return of the Joker, that continues on in a way more impactful way, in a super incredibly cool way, I believe. But yeah, I like how his legacy continues, and as people trying to be like him. I mean, it reminds me of the Dark Knight and the Batman imposters that were doing that, which is always kind of a theme of some Batman stories. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was neat.
And there's a lot of imitation when it comes to like the world of Batman, like you just mentioned with the Dark Knight Returns, and then the Dark Knight.
Yeah,
you've got a whole bunch of people running around in a Batman suit. So it's interesting to see how they inspire other people to go on and kind of model their lives around that. And then we get to go to Terry's high school, which is Hamilton Hill, which is the mayor from the animated series. But prior to that, he was an actual character in the comic books during like the Englehart era, which I hadn't read those really at the time, like the animated series had come out. And so that was my primary introduction. And then going back through, either trades or DC Universe Infinite, like the Hamilton Hill of the animated world is so much squeakier clean than the one in the comics, where he's like your typical Gotham mayor, where he is kind of corrupt. But we get to meet Nelson, who is basically like Terry's equivalent of Flash Thompson, if you're a Spider-Man guy. And it's funny because Terry and Nelson have like this little wrestling match, and we see that like Terry's not exactly squeaky clean. Like he's not, Nelson may be his Flash Thompson, but Terry's not really like that squeaky clean Peter Parker. Like there's some kind of like an edge to him, like you would expect Batman to have. And even like going to like a kids show about it, like Dana and Nelson's girlfriend, I can't remember her name right now, they're talking about the two guys, and she's like, "You've never wrestled with them." And it's like, what is, like it just seemed like
yeah,
I'm sure it flew over most kids' heads, but
yeah,
I was like, all right, that's one for the adults in the room.
Oh yeah, I think I mentioned earlier how much I was so shocked at how mature the show was. I mean, you talked about the obvious wrestling that Nelson and his girlfriend were doing, and then just, I mean, the beginning of the show is literally talking about how this guy Powers, or Derek Powers, is it even sets it in when Batman is going to save that girl initially at the very beginning, where Derek Powers is trying a hostile takeover of Wayne Industries. Fast forward 20 years later, now Powers and Wayne Industries have conjoined together. So they're talking about deep business strategy and economics and dark people who are incredibly depressed, and then also sexual jokes here and there. I'm like, this show is way more mature than I thought, even just 10 minutes in. So
yeah, it's interesting to hear the commentary where the studio went to them. They wanted more of like a kiddie type of show, or more of a Buffy type of show. I was like, I don't think you know what that means exactly, because Buffy wasn't a kid's show.
Yeah.
Oh no. Bill's gonna have to edit this out. I'm getting a running out of time. This meeting will end in 10 minutes. Upgrade now and save 40% off. So, all right, we're gonna power through and
that's fine.
See what we get here.
I thought you made a good point though with comparing him to Peter Parker, not necessarily personality wise, but kind of background and story wise, very similar to Peter Parker in a way with Terry McGinnis.
Yeah,
I thought the same thing too with Nelson. I was like, oh, that's essentially Flash Thompson.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's right. I mean, he, like Peter, he has, a mother figure, but not really a father figure. At least, I mean, you can count Bruce, but like that parental thing, isn't exactly there. But there's more on that in a Justice League episode. But I think we should save that for another Batmanimation episode.
I agree.
But his dad, Warren, gets a call from a coworker, and that puts him in the middle of a corporate conspiracy. And so we get to meet Derek Powers for the first time. And to me, because my brain is always either thinking about James Bond or Batman, like this felt like a very Bond villain moment. Powers definitely feels like a Bond villain, with like his henchman being Mr. Fix.
Yes.
And he's kind of got like a Lex Luthor vibe too, where he plays goody to the outside and pretends to be concerned, but privately behind closed doors, like you get to see, the real him.
Yes, I think we're on the same wavelength, man. Like I wrote in my notes, Mr. Fix is the most Bond looking goon I've ever seen. He looks straight out of a Roger Moore Bond flick. Mr. Fix is awesome. I don't know how he got his name, but it's hilarious. And I think you're right with Derek Powers. He's very similar to Lex Luthor as well. Very power hungry, obviously, as the show told us early on, that he's just trying to take over essentially all of Gotham, seems like.
Yeah. So when Warren gets home, he meets Terry there, and they have a verbal tiff. And Terry goes out with his girlfriend Dana, and they get attacked by the Jokers. Which the main Joker in this group is voiced by Bruce Timm, after they didn't like the original guy's performance. Wow. They mentioned in the commentary, and I think on one of the special features, and they don't say who the original voice is out of respect, but they just basically made Bruce Timm do it, and he wound up playing that guy or a variation of that guy throughout like the rest of the show. And this was also a time for me where I was working at a video store and watching a lot of anime for the first time because it was free. And so like I immediately made like the Akira connection with the motorcycles.
Yeah.
So in fighting the Jokers, Terry has to run, and he takes off on a motorcycle, and they all follow him, and it leads him back to Wayne Manor, or at least the outside of the gate of Wayne Manor, which had me wondering, like, what is Bruce doing standing out there? Like, like I'm assuming he's got cameras all over the place.
Yeah.
But even still, for someone to like see something's happening at that speed and like just be out there and ready, like it's great from like a dramatic effect. But it's like,
yes,
what is he doing out there?
Yeah, there's like two things there. Like, how does Terry know how to ride a motorcycle so incredibly well? Like literally gliding off other cars, using them as a ramp to fly off the bridge down, and then he's incredible on a motorcycle. But yeah, I wonder how long Bruce was tracking that, because it would have taken that old man probably 30 minutes to walk from his manor all the way down the road. And then maybe as a golf cart, maybe he's an old man, he's got a golf cart or something. He's riding down there, and maybe he just waits out there. That's like his evening routine. He watches the sunset. I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah. It was very dramatic though when they shows up, and then him and Terry team up and they fight the Joker gang, which it's awesome. Watch. I don't know what it is about me and old Batman. I just love when old Batman kicks ass. I think it's so cool. It's so damn cool with the cane, and then obviously his ailment is even worse than what it was 20 years prior. And I'll let you continue the rest of.
I was gonna say he's kind of like Attack of the Clones Yoda, where he just kind of hobbles around on his cane, but then when it's time to fight, like he's just all over the place.
That's a Dooku fight, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's just back to like, okay, I need my cane, and he's out of breath.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But like we had like a few interesting parallels where the Joker's like, let's put a smile on his face. And no one knew how Ledger was going to make that such a thing, like almost a decade later. And just how they're telling him like, we're the Jokers, and and the way Conroy is just like, sure you are, like like he's just so Batman in that moment, and he doesn't have to be like a slave to the pretense anymore of like being Bruce Wayne. And we get to see Ace for the first time in the animated series, which I always remember him from like the comics my dad would get me as a kid as a German Shepherd. So I thought it was really cool that they included a version of Ace, because we've had, I don't even know how many now, because in the 90s it was just kind of like some mutt, part Labrador, part Rottweiler looking mix. So to have like a Great Dane be Ace in the future made me wonder if this was like some kind of Scooby-Doo homage to all the team ups they did back in the day. I don't think they mentioned it at all, why they changed the breed for Ace.
I don't know. I mean, you add a dog to anything, and I think it almost always makes it better. I don't know how adding a dog to anything would make it worse, but I love this take of Ace. I think it's one of my favorite. It makes a lot of sense for an old Bruce who, Alfred's passed on. He doesn't talk to Dick Grayson or Barbara anymore, and he has no family left. So that's kind of normally the best companion for someone old and alone is a dog sometimes.
And just the whole back and forth of Terry being like, nice dog, and Bruce is not really. Like,
yeah, Ace is great, man.
Yeah. And they take Bruce back to the mansion, and I feel this so hard. Like the second he like gets his pill and gets in his chair, he is out.
He is.
Like, he is done. And so Terry has to call his dad to let him know what happened. And so he uses a landline at Wayne Manor to call his dad. And like I said, it's like 1999. So cell phones are not what they are today. Like, forget just the fact that our phones take videos and cameras and map apps and video games. Like, just the fact that a teenager doesn't have a cell phone is like unheard of.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's insanity.
But yeah, 1999, it's like, well, you got to have him call from a landline to call his dad to let him know. In a world where they have all these video conference calls, it was funny to me. And hologram newscasters that, he doesn't have his own phone to call his father on.
He was grounded. It got taken, right?
There you go. You just did the no prize for it. You figured it out.
Boom.
But so this is where Terry sees a bat in a clock, and that freeing the bat reveals the bat cave. So we go down, and from like this point on, whenever we see the bat cave, like the lighting shifts. It's got more of like this purple blue tone to kind of indicate how dark it is. So anytime anyone is in the bat cave from this point on, like the lighting is different. And he gets kicked out by Batman and goes home to find graffiti all over the place. It's just ha ha ha. And here where he finds out that his father's murdered, that's where like the guitar gets really heavy on like the Lethal Weapon. And and stuff. So Micah, how did you feel about Terry's father being murdered, carrying on the tradition of a parent being murdered for someone to either be Batman or Robin?
It's definitely one of the qualifications, right? If one of your parents isn't dead or a psychopath assassin, you can't be a superhero. But yeah, I think it draws even more similarities to Spider-Man, like we talked about earlier. Obviously, with him and his father leaving on negative terms, Terry being grounded and disobeying his father and wanting to leave, and obviously his father kind of being a neglector in a way. He's not really doesn't seem like he's very much focused in and mindful of Terry, which I don't know why Terry's living with his father and not with his mother, because he alludes to in that argument, my mom wouldn't be that upset, or mom would have had more time for me. He says something similar like that, like mom would have thought differently about this. So I don't want to get into the custody arrangements of whatever was going on there, probably a lot of drama or whatever, but I like it a lot. I think it's I can't imagine a bigger motivator in life than losing someone you deeply care about. And it is something I think that's a component of being not just, Robin but mostly being Batman. Losing your parent is a huge ordeal. And I really like the way they dealt with it, and Terry being confused as to why his father was killed. He had two run-ins with the Joker gang, one at the very beginning of the show on the subway train thing, and then obviously two with at the club with Dana, and then obviously leading back to Bruce Wayne. So on his way back from Wayne Manor, and him seeing that, if I was Terry, I would also be thinking, oh wow, like I caused this, like my run-ins and hostilities toward this Joker gang led to them somehow. He even mentions it. He's like, I don't know how they tracked me, when he's talking to his mom about it the next morning, and how much guilt he feels about it. And I think it's a first showing that he is an incredibly good person, because he's kind of a snarky, I don't want to say an asshole, but he is very sarcastic and maybe somewhat arrogant coming off throughout the first 10 20 minutes of the show. But just him reacting to that, I think, shows like it's our first viewing of his true character, and I really enjoyed it. How did you feel about it?
Well, I liked how he's sitting in his room, and like the light's like this cool blue as he's thinking about it. And he hasn't traveled the world under all these different masters and learned the art of detection, but it's showing that he's able to put two and two together and see, or maybe put two and three together, and like the answer is not right. Like he's not Batman level yet, or Bruce Wayne Batman level yet, but
yeah,
he's got the capacity to be able to solve a puzzle and figure out if something's not right, which I think is important for Batman to have. And Laura and I did an episode of the Batman book club recently, where we covered a death in the family. And one of the listeners wrote to me, Dan Benbow, and he had mentioned as a follow-up story, Batman 430 is really great. And there's, this active shooter thing happening, and Batman's got to stop it. And while he's doing that, he's having, recollections of like the night his parents were killed and how he and his dad had a fight, and how much he regretted that. Like he didn't mean to have like his last words be like, I hate you, I wish you were dead. Or he said something similar to that day, and then they died that night. So having that fresh in my mind now, it dovetails really well with Terry's regret to yelling at his dad being like the last interaction they had before, he got murdered. And so Terry finds this disc that's got the information that his dad was hiding, and goes to Bruce Wayne with it, saying that the cops are cozy with powers, and Bruce lets him in. And that concludes part 1. So as a half hour, like we don't get to see Terry as Batman beyond it all in that half hour. Like we get Batman at the very beginning, but then there's nary a cowl to be seen. Like if that's your first episode and you only saw that one part, like that's all you got.
Yeah, not much Batman in it, but there is a lot of Batman in a way. Maybe not the suit, but I think there is a ton of Batman overall. I think obviously I love Terry McGinnis as a character. I think he's really compelling and intriguing. And I think he has a lot of, obviously, I mean, you mentioned in the Justice League epilogue episode, I think it aired like way later, which kind of concluded the show. We learn why, but he shares a lot of elements with Bruce and a young Batman. And even though there's not a lot of Batman, you think with Batman to be action scenes. There's a good amount of action scenes in here to spice it up, but it's mostly just kind of like building the foundation for the story and who Terry is and introducing. I mean, they have to introduce Bruce too. You know, I mean, he's a completely different person. You can't just throw him in there. You know, like I think they have to introduce him as this completely different character as well. So there's a lot of just world building and character building they have to do, and I think they do a really damn good job in just 30 minutes with this show.
30 minutes plus commercials.
True.
And if you think about it, like we just talked about a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time that they established. It's pretty impressive how much they got done.
Yeah.
So jumping into part 2, Bruce is now looking at the evidence and finds that Powers is using his company to make nerve gas. He's devising this DNA mutagen. And in the Batcave, you know, while Bruce is doing that, Terry's checking out all the suits that are hanging behind him. And he sees what we know as the Beyond suit now. And, you know, Terry mentions as he's looking at it, because just apparently by looking at the costume itself, he can tell that it's got like a 10-to-1 strength ratio and all this other stuff. So he kind of just makes a little mental note. And Bruce tells Terry to go to Commissioner Barbara Gordon, which is the first time we hear that she's now taken over for her dad. But before he can get there, Fix and Powers get the disc from him before he can make it. And Terry goes back to steal the suit. So in doing that, he's got to distract Ace and ties him up to the fence. And so Bruce sees this and he just whips, you know, one of the new style Batman Beyond Batarangs at the cord to keep it, to get Ace out, which made me think, it's like, man, does Bruce just always have a Batarang on him? Like, he's got to. He just keeps one in his jacket pocket because you never know.
You know, he keeps that thing on him at all times.
Yeah.
He is ready. One thing I didn't think about with that is like, do you trust your aim, Bruce? Like, what if you hit Ace? You know,
right?
You could have just walked out there, man. But no, he's Batman. He's going to do Batman stuff.
So now that Terry grabs the suit, and now the Gotham sky isn't red anymore. Now it's purple. And we get a better view of like the skyline. We can see the kanji writing on the different buildings and whatever weird advertisements they have. And he goes to the Wayne Powers building, and Powers is showing off the effects of the gas to this diplomat that's interested in buying it. Like, you get to see like the beginning stages of like how the skin is blotchy, but then we just kind of cut to the diplomat's reaction. And it's like the guy is horrified whenever he sees.
Yeah, that's another element of it just being so mature, man. I mean, they showed a young calf in like that box, and like here's his first. We tested it on. Here's his first effect on animals. Then obviously it cuts away. It doesn't show that, and then it shows here's with humans, and it's like a day, 2 days, 3 days, and the guy is just completely horrified. And I could just imagine if I was just a little bit older when this came out, if I was like maybe 5, 6, 7, or 8, like that would have freaked me out for sure. Certainly.
Yeah. His reaction's pretty intense.
Yeah, and Power's scheme is so very Bond villain there. I'm going to release this. I'm going to make this gas and sell it to this guy. Yeah, it is. I think they took some cues from some old Bond villains for sure.
And Terry stumbles all this because he's in the bat suit and he's got great control of it already. He can fly around with the jet boots and glide, and knows that if he puts like his 2 fingers on the wall, he can like listen in, which is like a cool feature for like eavesdropping, but like how he does this, without the manual is I guess just how intuitive Bruce made that suit.
I guess you could just say that, and I think we talked about how well part 1 handled the world building. I think in part 2 they're like, okay, maybe we spent too much time with that, and Terry, he just knows what he's doing. He just knows.
Yeah.
They gave like the one scene when he's first flying and he's kind of like not doing it too well.
He wobbles just a second.
He wobbles, and then when he lands it the second time on the building, he's like better, and then the wingsuits come in, and then that is super cool. I love the suit. It's a little bit of an Iron Man and like Batman combined in a way. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up too, because like this was before, at least for the general audience, before we even saw like an Iron Man movie.
Yeah.
So like having like the heads up display and the cowl and someone in the earpiece telling you what to do, like this predates all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I take it for granted now because it's just seems like it's everywhere. Like even Spider-Man has an AI in his suit talking to him. So, it definitely helps too to add, as we go on with the series, to give like Terry some authenticity as Batman. Because while we know he's busy being the high school kid, he didn't do the traveling that Bruce Wayne did to become Batman. But it's kind of like that gives him that out because he has Bruce monitoring and telling him what to do.
Exactly.
To serve as guide.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop him from getting spotted by security and saying it's some guy dressed as Batman. And something I don't think I mentioned when we were talking about the intro, like I just love this suit and like how he kind of reminds me at times of like there's a Fantasia sequence where there's like this demon, he's got these big wings. And I like how Terry's suit, how it's different from Bruce's, where it doesn't have the cape, which to me is like an essential part of Batman, but he makes it work just being the solitary figure with red wings that can pop out when he needs them. And the guards that find him, like their outfits kind of look similar to what Shriek looks like in a couple episodes, just this white and black motif.
Yeah.
But as Terry's fighting these guys off, he gets locked out of the suit by Bruce and just starts getting pummeled by the guards. So it's a nice callback to the beginning where Bruce stopped wearing the suit when he was getting beaten. And now Terry is starting off wearing the suit, getting beaten.
Yes.
How did you feel about Bruce locking Terry out of the suit, especially for so long?
It's hard to watch because it feels like this isn't like that old Bruce has really lost it. He's not, those old elements that we saw in the animated series are now gone from what happened to him at the beginning of the show and him almost using a gun. And he can't see how Terry can carry the mantle forward. He hasn't seen that yet. All he can think about is his last time wearing the suit. And I talked earlier in the show why I love anything Batman related that really just dives into his psychology. And I love this moment and how Bruce he is willing initially to just let Terry die. Like he just feels like that's his fault. He almost deserves it. And it isn't until the last second where he finally lets go and gives Terry a chance to save himself. Whenever Terry cries out for help, essentially. I mean, he's a kid. He's like, Bruce, they're about to kill me. And the guy's about to shoot him. And that's another, like comparison to the beginning of the show, another metaphor. It's a really well-written show, man. For two just 30-minute episodes, so many parallels in part 1 and part 2. And that's why I felt like it's kind of hard to do talk about part 1 without talking about part 2, because there's so many tethers that, connect throughout the episode.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool turning point in the episode.
And so Bruce acquiesces and gives him the power back on and leads Terry to one of the secret rooms in the building, which was really cool. But basically Bruce is still like, okay, you're not going to die now. Come back and get out of the suit. You're done. And Terry has to appeal to him with his bringing up his father's murder. And that's, the big trigger for Bruce.
Yeah.
Is seeing that happen, or hearing about that happen, and the fact that his company is somehow tied in with it, making him an accomplice just by not being around.
Yeah.
So Terry heads over to the loading dock, to stop the nerve gas, and has another tussle with the guards that are loading it and Mr. Fix and Powers. And Powers shoots a container of the nerve gas, causing his exposure to it, which to me reminded me of the Joker in a sense, because it's in an early encounter with Batman at the factory, where he gets dropped into the acid and changes. Like, Batman doesn't drop him in, but it's an accident. And even later, once we see what happens with Powers due to that exposure, just the way he's laughing after he sees what's become of him, it's very 89 Nicholson.
Yeah.
But that's the end of the episode. Prior to that, Fix and Batman, their fight takes to the air, and in a sense, it kind of reminds me of On Leather Wings, because we're ending like the premiere episode basically of a Batman show with him fighting in the sky. Although this one's a lot more personal than Batman versus Man-Bat.
Yeah.
So we get Mr. Fix and Terry fighting, and Terry has to come back with, he's not only getting knocked around, but he's like verbally assaulting him too. And Terry's like, "I am Batman," and throws his little batarang, and the ship goes down with Mr. Fix on board. So we don't really know what happens to Mr. Fix, if he drowns or if he escapes, like if Terry's like an accomplice to manslaughter or murder. We don't really know. But it's we never, as far as I know, we don't ever see Fix again after this. I don't think he comes back. I'm definitely sure he doesn't come back in an episode, and I don't think it ever gets addressed again in the comics of that era either, which had one of the writers of the show on the book. How did you like that final fight?
Oh, I thought it was awesome. And you mentioned incredibly personal. I think I can't remember if you mentioned it or not. I know I didn't for sure, but when he's eavesdropping on that conversation, that's when he finally finds out that Mr. Fix was the one, or essentially Powers. Yeah. But Fix was an arm of Powers, that he killed Terry's father and just pinned it on and made it seem like it was a Joker game to kind of thwart attention toward them, because it seemed like something they would do, obviously. And I guess it's just really convenient to them that Terry had run-ins with them prior. But I really dig it. I really enjoyed how you brought up how even more similarities to, with Batman kind of creates Joker in a way, depending on Joker's origin story and the Red Hood thing, that Terry kind of created in a way Powers, where he threw the gas on him and then like shooting skeet. I think I laughed out loud when he said that initially after Terry threw that first batarang. But I don't know. Do you think Terry, I'll just ask you, do you think Terry knew he would shoot the gas again because he shot the batarang, that he threw it intentionally for him to shoot and break on him? Or do you think he was just throwing it to knock him out? I think that's a intriguing thing to ask. I'm not sure if he meant it intentionally or not.
I never really thought about it like that. My initial reaction is to say that here's a kid in a suit that he just got, and he's not really sure what he's doing.
Yeah.
So he's just throwing stuff as a way of fighting, not really anticipating that he's going to, do himself in that way. True.
That's a good point. It does kind of feel like Terry has like a little bit darker edge to him in a way. I don't know if that's just because he's younger or not, or that's just a part of his character for at least now.
I definitely feel like there would be more intent in the Mr. Fix fight, knowing that he was the actual hand on the trigger, or the metaphorical trigger, at least, for the death of his father.
Yeah. I mean, that reminded me a lot of Batman Begins too. And when Bruce, it's so sick when at the end where Batman leaves Ra's al Ghul,
Yeah.
I don't have to save you. You know, it's so cool. So cool. Which I kind of agree with Batman there. Like, you know, Terry didn't, you know, he didn't make the guy, you know, get hired by powers and then transport this horrifyingly evil gas to this Eastern European Russian wannabe, I don't know, it's obviously something like that, dealer or political leader to fight some type of war. You know, it's obviously something terribly evil. So
yeah,
I don't think
it's
Terry,
more
you know,
than it's more than just vengeance. Like there's an actual major crime that he's stopping,
yeah, he
and
is, 'cause,
lives are at stake.
yeah, because that's another great thing about Terry's character, because obviously he you know, connects with Bruce because he murdered his father, but he also brings up, you know, like, we have to stop this. Like, this is bigger than just that. You know, this gas is gonna potentially kill thousands of people.
Yeah, it definitely ups the stakes for the episode.
Yeah.
So we wind down with Bruce paying a visit to Terry's home, and his mom is just all about Bruce Wayne. Oh my God, Bruce Wayne! Like, you didn't tell me you knew Bruce Wayne. um, and just, you know, this is like the only time we really see Bruce be cordial at all.
Oh, his
And
voice, Kevin Conroy is so good in the scene because he sounds so different.
and even just the way he greets Terry, he's like, Terrence.
Yes,
Like,
Terrence. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I loved how they did it too, because it's like it's a great cover of having Terry working for Bruce and the odd hours, you know, like they came up with this way before Peter Parker was doing a Stark internship in the Marvel movies. So, and even with that, that setup for them, that dynamic going forward, like it doesn't make life any easier for Terry. Like, it's a good explanation, but as we'll see, as you know, the seasons go on, like it's still working for Bruce Wayne causes problems in, you know, like his personal life with his girlfriend and, you know, at home.
Yeah. I love that first shot after that first shot of Terry waking up in his apartment. If you look under his bed, you can see the bat suit kind of like just tucked in down there. Like he didn't do a really good job of hiding it. Like, it's awesome. Like, he obviously got back, was exhausted, and just like went straight to bed. I love that first shot. And you mentioned earlier how great Kevin Conroy is and how good he is of just being a Bruce Wayne and then also being Batman. But I love how he changes his voice again to still sound not just like young Bruce Wayne, but an older, more elegant Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
He does such a good job of fooling, which I don't think he even really need to try that hard, because Terry's mother was head over heels and could not believe that Bruce Wayne was there. So I don't think he really needed to even try that hard.
Yeah.
But he did a very convincing job. Kevin Conroy did as Bruce Wayne in that scene of kind of, it wasn't his first rodeo, obviously. Like, he's spent how long? 50 years, you know, throwing off his secret identity. So he's definitely setting up Terrence for success.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I love it. Maybe I'm just listening too much into it, but his whole welcome to my world, like he starts to throw a little bit of Batman in there as he says that and throws his hand out to him. And you know, something we haven't talked about, and I haven't really thought about, how did you feel about Matt? Not just in this episode, but throughout the series. Terry's little brother.
His little brother, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we see so much more of him later on, and I think it really is as simple as, like, it's almost kind of like his Robin in a way. I think it's Terry's version of that. And it's another element that differentiates Terry from Bruce, even though they're very similar, where he needs to be there's another reason for him to be home, because he's still a brother, he's still a son. So he has other I think it gives him another element of responsibility to the show, which I enjoyed. Matt, I like his conflicting personality. He actually reminds me a lot of my younger brother Jake and our dynamic growing up. I wasn't cool enough to be Batman or anything, but or have any issues like that. But it definitely reminds me a lot of that. So maybe that's also an element why I've loved the show so much, because I just can relate to it in a multitude of ways. But how did you feel about him?
Like, first watching it, like my first impressions from back in the day was like, it reminded me of Tim Drake, how his he had both parents, started to be Robin, and then his mom died. So then he was just kind of stuck with his dad. So the single parent child dynamic, I connected that with Tim and Terry, but then having Matt throws a wrinkle in that. And I kind of found him irritating, because you're, in a way, you're supposed to, because he's the irritating little brother. But it does this weird thing for Terry where you picture Batman one way.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time picturing anyone else as Batman other than Bruce, because they haven't done the work that Bruce did, be it Jason or Dick or Jace Fox even. But Terry brings like a little something extra because he has Bruce constantly, in his ear. But then to go from Terry being Batman out on the street doing all these things, and then he gets home and there's Matt, and it takes him down, not takes him down a level to where he's not like cool or anything, or not a good character, but like it changes the dynamic. And all of a sudden he goes from being Batman to the big brother. And like his whole like attitude, like this is a guy who's dealing with all these hard things, getting revenge, avenging his father, but then his little brother irritates him and he calls him a twip and smacks him upside the head, or flicks cereal at him, just something like it gives him like a common man element that we haven't really seen in the Batman world before. And it's so like at times while Matt kind of irritates me, like at the other half, like he brings an interesting dynamic to the show that we don't get in any other iteration of Batman, that I kind of enjoy seeing, because it, like I said, it makes him more human and more relatable. And I think that's probably one of the things that, the studio execs were looking for to get those younger kids more into Batman. Like it's hard to get young kids into Batman. Like that doesn't make any sense. Batman's for all ages.
He is.
But I wound up enjoying him a lot, and then it just goes, I haven't even been able to keep up with all the different Batman Beyond series that DC has done post I guess New 52. They've done just so many different iterations now where Matt becomes older and becomes more of a character. But after Bruce welcoming Terry, we just get that little end cap of Blight being born. He's not named Blight, but we see Derek Powers' official transformation, and the animation's really good there.
Super good.
And just a nice green glow, and you've got people in their radiation suits. We'll have to talk more Batman Beyond and see how Blight carries forward. I don't necessarily feel that he becomes the equivalent of like a Joker for Terry. I mean, he's certainly a worthwhile villain. And the cool thing about Blight, though, is he's both a nemesis for Bruce Wayne and for Batman.
Yes. This show does, I mean, we've talked about it constantly, but this show does such a good job of connecting Terry and Bruce in a very organic way and giving them both motivations and justifications as to why there needs to be another Batman. And I think the dual connection of Derek Powers, obviously he essentially is destroying Wayne Industries. He can join his company with Wayne Enterprises, and now it's Wayne Powers, and it's obviously he wants to probably axe off that first name, just leave it Power Industries. So that's obviously a mega motivator of his and goal of his, but also now he has this other side of him, and he's also the main reason why Terry's father died, and he's a villain now. It's a really cool, compelling way. It gives him a lot of value other than just looking cool and being someone for Terry to fight. Because I mean, with this, I like how the show it seems to get a little bit more fantastical in a way, but it uses just it being in the future as a justification in a way. Yeah, it feels, because this a Blight character in the animated series wouldn't seem maybe a little bit out of place, but it doesn't feel out of place at all in this. It feels right in. And I think another thing to say just with the show is I think it does a perfect job of the whole future setting doesn't feel weird, even being now like in the future where it's 2022 now and the show takes place, I think, in 2039. So really not even that far into our future now.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, we talked about cell phones earlier. Why does Terry not have a cell phone? But it's a believable world. You know, the animated series had the Zeppelins and the cars were like kind of 50-ish stylized in like the 50s and 60s. And I just think the show just does a good job with the setting. And I'm rambling on now, and I'm just going to pitch it over to you. So,
so
can't stop talking about the show.
Oh, no, it's phenomenal. And now that I've rewatched the pilot again, it's like, oh man, I need to just start and binge everything all over again because I had such a good time revisiting it. Before we totally close out though, I remember seeing, I want to say it was a Wizard magazine, when they were initially talking about this show debuting in a teenage Batman. And one of the proposed titles for the show was The Tomorrow Night. What do you feel, or how do you feel about that as potential title, or even just as like a nickname, like the Caped Crusader for Terry's iteration of Batman?
I think that's a badass name. That's an awesome name. Why is that? That's never been replicated before or stolen.
No,
that's part of my knowledge, right? The Tomorrow Night. Yeah, I really like that.
I remember seeing it, and I want to say it was like a Wizard magazine because, you know, there was no internet really back then. I mean, there was, but it wasn't what it is now. But
wow,
Bruce Timm had basically said the problem they ran into was, you know, when you're marketing it for TV, like tomorrow on Tomorrow Night or today's Tomorrow Night, like it didn't really work out because of the whole time concept. And hence Batman Beyond. So
I still love that name too. I think it's a great name. I think it's a really, really cool name. I think it's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And then it worked out even pretty good with, you know, Beyond the White Knight.
Exactly. Which I've read that, and I loved everything. I mean, talk about Sean Murphy forever. Love that run of White Knight. So yeah, it's a great name. Very fitting.
So Michael, where can people find you?
People can find me on YouTube at RAMEY Review, like you mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for acknowledging that and having me on the show, and just thank you for everything, man. You're stud. We talked earlier about how you told me you work dispatch. I'm like, that makes perfect sense as to why you're so smooth on the podcast, Mike. But yeah, you could find me there. Then every now and then, whenever someone invites me on BOF on the social hour or like this show on Batmanimation. So first time here, big honor. Had a ton of fun today. Really appreciate you, man.
I mean, we, after I heard that, I'm like, oh, because like when the whole Batmanimation thing got, you know, talked amongst ourselves, it's like, I want to do everything. Like I want to talk about every show, every iteration.
And there's not enough. Like you're never going to run out, you know, you'll never cover it all.
So once I heard that you were a fan too, I'm like, oh, I got to record with Micah, because you and I haven't really been on mic together ever. We've met once, but we haven't actually had a chance to sit down. So I was so happy that you were game for it, and just thank you so much for being on the show. I had a blast, dude, and I hope you'll come back on again and we can talk some more Batman Beyond or any other animated Batman movies or shows you're a fan of.
Oh man, I'm so down. I don't want to stop talking about Batman Beyond. I mean, you saw me at the end. I was just rambling there for however long that was. I didn't want to stop, but I know you can only go so long on a podcast. People only have so much time in their day. So yeah, I want to respect people's time. But yeah, man, it was an honor to be here. I love Batman Beyond. Batmanimation is a great name, by the way. I don't know who came up with that, but great name.
I'm not even sure either. But it was such a pleasure to have you, man. And as for me, I am Javi Trujillo. You can find me at Javi True on Twitter. The Bond Is Not Enough on Instagram. And I've got a whole bunch of reviews on BatmanOnFilm.com. I've got The Dark Knight Rises hot toy review on our YouTube channel. And Ryan Lauer and I recently interviewed Sean Gordon Murphy, where we talk all about Beyond the White Knight, which is a great interview. There's some spoilers for the issue that's coming up in a week or two for issue 5. But otherwise, if you've been keeping up with Beyond the White Knight, you can definitely give this podcast a listen. And he's just a great guy to talk to and just full of energy. And I'm so glad he came back on the show. So that is it for us today for this episode of Batmanimation. And we will let announcer Rachel take us home.
Thanks for listening to Batmanimation, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast revisiting the animated TV and film adventures of the Caped Crusader. Follow Batmanimation on Twitter @Batmanimation. Follow BOF on Twitter @TheBatmanOnFilm. Follow Jet on Twitter @BatmanOnFilm. For Jet and Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, the original, established in 1998.